Joining me today is scientist and author Anand Ranganathan, who's out with his new book that is doing tremendously well online on Amazon, Hindus in Hindu Rashtra. It's a short but scary tale of the injustices that have been institutionalized against the majority community in India, where it's not just the insensitivity towards their concerns, their history, their culture, but also laws that function against them for no justifiable reason, but because they're larger in number. Anand, thanks a lot for speaking to CNN News 18 and many congratulations on your book. First of all, what do you think is the biggest of the injustices that you have listed out? You've listed out eight of them particularly, but what, according to you, is the biggest of them all?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Shivani, for having me. It's really always a pleasure to be speaking with you. And thank you so much for your wishes for the book. Yes, it is doing spectacularly well. To be honest, I didn't really expect it to do so well. I think it's kind of struck a chord with a lot of people, particularly the younger generation, possibly because of its size. No one reads War and Peace shaped books anymore, I suppose. No, but to very quickly answer your question before we come to the other specific of the book, I think the last reason that I give, which is the Places of Worship Act. I think that hurts me the most because, as I've talked in that chapter as well, I've often wondered what is the difference between civilization and an empire. Why do empires vanish and they don't exist anymore, most of them, but civilizations don't? And I think the reason for that, I suppose, it can be a very subjective reasoning. But as far as I'm concerned, I think it is for us to ask for the historical injustices to be corrected, justice for our ancestors, because that is what maintains continuity. It's almost, as I mentioned, it's like memory. It keeps getting passed on until it is realized. And, the terrible hardships and almost near annihilation that our ancestors went through this wave of invasions that happened, and tens of thousands of temples that were destroyed. And if you read Dr. Meenakshi Jain's authoritative and scholarly works on this, that how bit by bit, little by little, they actually, hid the idols in wells, under houses to protect them. And then when the invasions passed away or passed on, then they, brought those things again. So they've kept this flame of our culture and civilization alive. And if our present generation cannot deliver justice to them, I think that's the most cruel thing. So yes, there is discrimination institutionalized in the other 7 things as well, but this one hurts the most because this actually prevents any law-abiding Hindu to, in fact, even approach the courts to seek for justice, And how can that be allowed in a democracy is something that is beyond cruelty for me. Yeah.
Well, the Places of Worship Act is certainly under question as we speak, and there are other litigations that are going on, which will test the Places of Worship Act all over again in the country. When we talk about this reclamation of, historical Hindu places of worship, Anand, I've always found it very fascinating. You look at the global left, and all over the world, they support the movement for reclamation, even reparation. But for some reason, the left opposes Hindu reclamation in India. Why do you think that dichotomy exists?
Yes, in fact, I talk about it. The left even supports illegal or the structures that were built upon, other things, or the statues and the glorification of the so-called conquistadors and, Pizarro and imperialists to be brought down illegally. I mean, recently in Belgium, the statue of King Leopold was brought down illegally and the West cheered it. Of course, he was the butcher of Congo. But out here, they eulogize and worship Aurangzeb and Tipu and, so I find it very difficult to pin down just one reason why they do it. The most overwhelming reason for me is their love for jihadism or global Muslim brotherhood, whatever you may call it. But at the heart of it is actually hatred for Hinduism. And you've seen in the past week how one small spark has been lit by people who want to eradicate Sanatan Dharma. So, this is not something that people said 50, 40, 50 years ago, Shivani. They did. I mean, Periyar did. But this is an ongoing process. This need and the striving to eradicate Hinduism is manifested in, the support for anything or anyone that can demolish not only Hinduism philosophically through books. Burning of Nalanda, as I explained, has been cushioned away by saying that it was actually done by a couple of Hindu beggars and not by Khilji. So, in every aspect of how Hinduism manifests itself, they want to destroy. That's the reason.
And one of those very important ways is not allowing the reclamation of at least the holiest of all Hindu sites. And we've seen how long the Ram Janmabhoomi case took. The other question I want to ask you is that why is it that it is liberal and progressive to suggest that Hindus must always either contain themselves or give up certain of their natural rights purely because they are larger in number? Because, as you enlist in your book, all the historical reasons, some of them can be accused of the left. But as you very rightly talk about in your book, we've had 10 years of what is referred to as a Hindu nationalist government by a Hindu nationalist party. And yet, a lot of these historical injustices haven't been overturned. What I don't understand is that why is the Hindu population so okay with this? And why is it that the burden of numbers, of being larger in numbers, is so great on Hindus in India?
So there are a couple of historical reasons for this, Shivani. First of all, when you say that even though we've had 10 years of supposedly Hindu government, and quite a lot of these historical injustices still remain, I slightly correct you. Each one of those remains. So this government is exactly the same as any other government. They haven't really worked on this. It's just that there is a feel-good factor for Hindus, I suppose, that we have Narendra Modi and so-called Hindu Hriday Samrat at the helm. But if push comes down to shove, I don't think they've actually done even the same as Congress, if not more. But the question that you asked, a lot of it has to do with guilt tripping of a majority. Now, this is a very natural process. The minorities, they many times, I might be, using a very rough phrase for it, but they play the victimhood card, which is to be expected because they're the minority. And it happens in most countries. In India, it happens. But I think if you go not just to a lot back, but just 70, 80 years back at the birth of the modern republic, and I start by, in fact, it's on the first page. The gauntlet was thrown by none other than Mahatma Gandhi. When he said, in order to quell this kind of Hindu-Muslim acrimony, he said, I wouldn't mind if all the Hindus were to be killed by Muslims. And at the end of the day, if a new dawn would bring this kind of new Raj, that would usher in a golden age or something of that sort. So when the father of the nation says something like that, what follows is amazing sense of, guilt tripping is just one word for it. Self-loathing is another. And we've been brought up on it. And if you look at traditionally what actually happened, Congress ceded the space of education, writing books, and how to quote unquote brainwash people completely to the left. I mean, Nurul Hasan and all those people. So when all our textbooks that are that were written for the last 70 years have glorified and wanted the death of Hinduism, have glorified invaders, have glorified Aurangzeb, butchers, what else do you expect? We've been brainwashed to such an extent that it's now almost terminal, and it's almost blasphemous to think that Hindus should be given these rights. I mean, I've got people who come to me and have said that I really wasn't aware as to some of the reasons that you've told in this, but do we really need to fight for these rights? So there are Hindus who are not even aware that these rights should belong to every human being, not just Hindus.
You use the term self-loathing. I would say it's almost suicidal because in our living history, we have seen the footprint of the Hindu civilization or the Indian civilization shrink in the Indian subcontinent. You don't even have to go as far back as 1,000 years. I don't know where that comes from because in lived reality, very educated, aware, and pious Hindus seem to have the belief that there is nothing to fear or no danger. One, or second, that Hindus mustn't ask for more or even the equalization of this unlevel playing field because it is unseemly or it appears bigoted. Why do you think the Hindus suffer from this mindset so particularly?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with two reasons. The first one is political. Let me very quickly be done with it because the more important one is philosophical. So political, unfortunately, a lot of our leaders, they otherwise they're very erudite people, but they somehow manage to mix politics in, you know, what should be devoid of politics, which is when you talk of genocide, when you talk of historical injustices, you really shouldn't bring politics in it. But let me take the example of Dr. Shashi Tharoor, normally a very erudite person, but he mixes politics in it. The other day he said that there was no genocide against Hindus by the Mughals or by the invaders because so many of us still exist. That was his logic. By that logic, there was no genocides against Sikhs in 1984 because Sikhs still exist. There was no genocide in Bangladesh in 71 because, a million, tens of millions of Bangladeshis still exist. So when you bring in politics to explain away the obvious crimes, that is what is hurtful, and that actually goes on to brainwash a lot of people. Now to the second issue, which is more philosophical. It's the only, and I've said this also. The difference between Hinduism and Abrahamic religions is that in Hinduism, religion or religious aspect of Hinduism is an offshoot of a way of life. Whereas in Islam and Christianity, way of life is an offshoot of religion. So it follows that the Hinduism is the one which is amenable, that mutations can occur because ways of lives change. We've seen that through centuries, so many unkind, cruel things that were almost taken as part of Hinduism are absolutely abhorred now, have been considered illegal, untouchability, caste system, and a lot of other things. So the way of life, as it changes, as it progresses, the whole structure, the umbrella itself changes. But if you go back to the Sanatan Dharma, it is an all-questioning religion. I mean, or a way of life. I mean, for example, in which quote-unquote religion would you find promotion of atheism? I mean, there are sects in Hinduism like Charvaks that believe in atheism. There are sects, Lingayats, they do not believe in the Vedas. So when Hinduism itself is asking questions and the other religions don't, you see, the tolerant streak is what gives rise to, bringing in intolerant people. And that is what has happened. That is the tragedy.
Would you say that this, history is also a very important battlefield? And as you said, our history books teaching was all in the hands of a particular set of people, and this is also one of those things that the current government has not really been able to change. We keep hearing of things happening, or one chapter, one paragraph here and there, but there's not been a wholesome revision of Indian history textbooks, mainstream history textbooks. Do you think that is fundamentally the reason this continues?
Absolutely fundamental. And I say, maybe a little bit trifle bombastic I may sound, but I say nations weaken not because of their past, but because of how they are taught it. And I think I've found that increasingly to be true, because if you eulogize monsters and invaders who butchered and perpetrated genocides and ethnic cleansing, if you cushion their crimes and if you eulogize them, then you are essentially weakening your capacity to fight future aggressors. You're weakening the capacity to seek justice. You're weakening the capacity to tell the right from wrong. And the biggest example is communism. I mean, communists still exist in India because they've been fed on the sepia-tinted notion that this is something which is to be aspired to. People eulogize Karl Marx, and I'm sitting right now in a small tract of land where in JNU where this would be almost blasphemous to say it outside the confines of this room. But, people wear Che Guevara t-shirts without knowing that the guy was a homophobic mass murderer. People eulogize Pol Pot and Mao without knowing that Mao killed 63 million of his own people, through this great leap forward. So when people are ignorant of the history and of the butchers and invaders, they really cannot tell what is right from what is wrong. And that is the reason why it still exists. And it is, and I've said this before, you can expect non-BJP governments to actually keep publishing these books and keep brainwashing, but you don't expect in the last 10 years for things to remain the same, status quo. But what to talk of change, Shivani? Here you have BJP ministers who said they're proud to have not changed even a small comma in or a full stop in these textbooks. They're proud of not changing.
So that brings me to the question. You've talked about things like the Waqf Act. You've talked about the RTE, for example, that discriminates against the majority educational institutions. You've talked about the Kashmir genocide, not even accepting that it's a genocide, and those cases never really been tried fully. No justice being delivered to the Kashmiri Pandits. You've talked about, as you said, the Places of Worship Act and more. So you've given these broad 8 reasons in your book why Hindus are 8 class citizens in a so-called Hindu Rashtra today. So if having a government led with full majority by the BJP, which is called the Hindu Nationalist Party, Narendra Modi is called the Hindu nationalist leader, if that is not enough, then what is to be done?
Yeah.
How do we change this?
Yes. So, I have never had faith in politicians because by definition, they are corrupt, they are malleable, every one of them. Every one of them. No, there is no exception. And by definition, they want to placate a vote bank. They want to win elections. That is by definition. So any politician who's not adhering to those mantras, I'm afraid is not a politician. At best, he can get nominated to Rajya Sabha and he can not win an election and he can make some incremental changes. But even then, he would have to toe the party line or whatever it may be. But as a society, as a polity, as a billion strong people, when you want justices to be delivered, when you want historical injustices to be corrected, if you cannot approach the politicians or the parliament because they are subject to their vote banks or communities, there is one last door where you can knock, which is the Supreme Court. But as I show in this book painfully, even that has been denied to us. Not just to Indians, but specifically to Hindus. And it is so painful, Shivani, when I talk about all other, I can talk about the technicalities of the RTE or the Waqf, that's legally being drawn out by the legislature and passed by the parliament. But the fact or the decision to not reopen cases of atrocities, blatant atrocities, known atrocities against Kashmiri Hindus, where the perpetrators have admitted on camera that yes, they butchered, yes, they killed Bitta Karate, Yasin Malik. And then for the Supreme Court to say that we will not reopen those cases because too much time has elapsed. I think, I said at the beginning that the most cruel was Places of Worship Act, but I think this single decision is even more, I don't know, this might be recounting Chinese tortures, but what to do, Shivani? Each new cruelty is superseding the other. How can, in a democracy, the Supreme Court say, so much time has elapsed, so we will not reopen. And then 6 months later, they set up an SIT to reopen cases of atrocities against 1984. So 6 years, 7 years down the line, cases have happened. They are saying too much time has elapsed, but they are willing to open cases against, crimes against Sikhs that happened 7 years earlier. Is this justice? So, I'm sorry to be so blunt and pessimistic, but people have hopes against parliamentarians. Those hopes I don't have because, I go by brute logic and history. When Shah Bano judgment can be overturned, when Supreme Court judgments can be overturned because you want to placate a vote bank. Yes, so I don't have any hope in politicians. But when the Supreme Court acts the way it does, where else? Where do you want to go then? The United Nations, which is as toothless as the RWA. So there is no hope. I'm terribly sorry to give this message.
Well, I would say that those who read Anand, your book, will definitely feel the pain that you're talking about, particularly on the issue of the injustices to Kashmiri Pandits, because you've referred to it with great pain, I would say, and you've reflected that pain of the entire community. I do want to ask you finally. They always say it's a great saying that in your 20s and 30s, you're a left liberal, and by the time you're 40, 50, you become a conservative. Do you feel in India, with the advent of social media, with greater communication and with greater topics being discussed, which were earlier just taboo or nobody really talked about it with such honesty, people like you writing these books, maybe, as you said, targeting the young to catch them early, do you feel there is any change in that, or are the young more aware today about things that maybe you and I were not aware when we were 20 or 25?
Absolutely. And I say it with, absolute certainty that the youngsters or today's generation is so much more intelligent and so much more aware than us. But that is how it should be. I mean, evolution, should not go the other way around. So we're very thankful this has happened. And, to give you one example, J. Sai Deepak, who's a real legend and a stalwart and has written authoritative books, India, that is Bharat, by the way, that he's written. He was to deliver a lecture, I think, 4 or 5 days ago, under the auspices of the Kerala Law Bar Council. And some lawyer association wanted that lecture not to be held. They wanted to ban JSI, but the lecture went ahead. And if you see the photographs or photos
Yes.
of that lecture, there is one photograph where the hall is absolutely crowded, jam-packed. Outside the hall, there is a window, and an old father is standing on a chair, and his young daughter is looking through those grills, trying
Of
to
the
catch
window.
trying to catch whatever J-Sai is saying. I mean, that one picture itself tells you the story of New India. Nothing has made me more proud than that photograph, where people, and J-Sai is not a film star yet, but uh, for a young lady, she must be 15, 16, not more than that, to be, crouching and looking, peering wide-eyed through that window to catch a glimpse of Sai, to, some soundbite of him, it just fills my heart with pride. So yes, things are changing. I might have sounded terribly pessimistic 5 minutes ago, but I don't have an avenue where these youngsters who are different from than we were
Mhm.
channelize this energy too. I really have run out of avenues because Supreme Court won't listen to them, parliamentarians won't listen to them. So somebody has to listen to them. I don't want them to indulge in anarchy and come onto the streets. Certainly not. But till such time, I find that avenue where youngsters can go. At least I take solace in the fact that there are such youngsters.
So there is hope after all. And I think fundamentally, if the balance shifts in favor of those who will not stand by these injustices any longer, maybe all of the institutions, including the politicians you talk about, will have to act. So far, it's been that the balance has been on the other side in terms of the quote unquote establishment and the voices that were heard the most. So today there is a greater democratized world in terms of communication. More people can be heard, more people can say their piece, and they can learn more as well. So maybe there is hope after all. On
Yeah.
that note, I want to thank you, Anand. It's always a pleasure to speak to you, and I do obviously recommend all of those watching us to buy your book, Hindus in Hindu
If,
Rashtra.
if I if
As
I
I
can be
said,
shameless and show this,
yes,
that's the
absolutely.
book.
As I said once again, it's a very short but scary tale of what Hindus have been through and continue to go through. And this is not just about being communal, frankly. In a country like India, for the majority population to keep undergoing what is undergoing is a matter of great concern for anybody who's living in India. And Anand is a self confessed atheist.
Yeah.
I am a self confessed agnostic. So it's not just about those who believe in religion alone or practice religion alone. It is just about,
Justice.
principles of
Yeah.
democracy and justice. Thank you, Anand. Many
Thank you very
congratulations
much,
once
Ivan.
again.
Thank you so much. A real pleasure. Thank you.